We're live.
Sorry.
No. It's all good times here. These are the moments that we enjoy. Sundays with friends. Sundays with football. Actually, yesterday, for Saturday, college football was back. We'll see if we get a big rush of energy. We get a big rush of energy being joined by Dr. Jene Bramel, Jason Wood, Mitch Carl. We get Mitch only for about the first 20, 25 minutes. So let's just jump right in. First, Gene, and I'd like to give us context here. Buffalo and the Rams, we've got two new primary running backs because of running back injuries. What's the latest on Zach Moss, who's out? We're looking ahead here. Cam Akers, who's out, looking ahead here, and Malcolm Brown, who's going to play but had surgery on his finger this week.
Yeah, we haven't gotten much information about Zach Moss. So we're just sort of working on priors as far as turf toe injuries and toe sprains in general, regardless if it's really a turf toe or not. We're not really sure, but that's what the speculation would be. Tends to be a multiple week injury for running backs unless it's extremely low grade. And that seems to be the situation. Didn't return to practice all this week. We didn't hear what the Bills had to say. So he's one of a handful of players that we're going to wait to see until, post-game press conferences, maybe even Monday, what his week 4 outlook looks like. Malcolm Brown should be okay. Don't want to really minimize the broken finger or something that needed surgery, but pinky finger should not interfere too much with him ability to do the duties of the running back position. And the Rams were pretty positive as soon as they announced the injury. They said, we expect him back. He practiced both Thursday and Friday, would assume that showed the team that he can do everything he needs to do. But as you mentioned, Darrell Henderson is lurking. So what I wrote this morning is that I think Henderson's role is probably the bigger threat to Brown than the finger at this point. And I'll let you guys speak on whether or not you feel like Henderson's going to take over more than, do what Cam Akers was doing or potentially even more.
Mitch, we taking the bait on Henderson or Singletary in DFS today?
That's a great question. Good phrasing, too. Taking the bait. I think it's a trap. I'm looking at Buffalo. They have 2 linebackers returning this week, and that defense was already playing so well. Only allowed 75 rushing yards per game through the first 2 games. I get it, small sample size, but we knew the Bills' defense was good coming into the season. I'm not too sure that there's any potential value on the Rams for DFS at all at any position today. And on the Buffalo Bills side, it's an interesting situation. At 4.9K with Devin Singletary, just looks like a fantastic price over there on DraftKings. But then, there's always the chance here where Josh Allen just vultures some red zone touchdowns today, in which case you're sitting there with a chalkier Devin Singletary who maybe gets, 18 or so touches total today and could have a nice floor. But without those touchdowns, we're just missing out on that ceiling. And I wonder if Singletary might be a better option for a cash games where you have a pretty decent shot at getting, 3 times value or so, because he'll rack up 3 to 4 catches. But is he going to get those red zone touchdowns? And I think that boils down to whatever you believe in today. And if you think he is a value play or is a solid tournament option.
Woodrow, you got to see the Rams defense pretty closely last week watching your Eagles. The Bills offense is like a runaway train right now. Are the Rams going to slow them down? Is this going to be a week where we see more of the Josh Allen flaws as opposed to Josh Allen joining the elite in the first 2 weeks?
Well, I think you phrased it right. I mean, obviously, Josh Allen has been the breakout quarterback this year. I think he's first or second, depending on your scoring system in every league. But as you said, I mean, he's faced 2 cupcake defenses. At least we think they're cupcake defenses through 2 weeks. So this will be the test, right? I'm not sure the Rams have a great defense, as Mitch noted. I mean, certainly they haven't done a great job stopping the run. But that being said, I mean, on paper they should be a much better, more effective defense than the Bills have faced. So I mean, this is really a litmus test. As you know, in our staff dynasty league, I have Josh Allen, so I'm happy. But I'm a little reticent this week. It's one of those things where if he puts on a show this week, then we have to coronate him, right? We have to put the crown on him and say he belongs in the conversation with Mahomes and Lamar Jackson as young franchise pieces. And it's ironic because a month or 6 weeks ago, a lot of us were thinking that he was on a short list along with Derek Carr of incumbent starting quarterbacks who could see themselves out of a job by the end of the year if they didn't play well. But certainly if he plays well this week, then I start thinking you start hearing about talks of long-term extensions and he's got security. So, I don't, it's really hard to say because again, based on what we've seen him weeks, how could you not be super encouraged? But on the other hand, I just fear that the 2 weeks that we've seen him play have just been such a low quality of opposition that we just can't be 100% sold, but I'm optimistic.
Yeah, him and Baker Mayfield and Mitch Trubisky, I think, were three quarterbacks going into this year. Obviously, we are going to evaluate Daniel Jones to a lesser extent. Speaking of Daniel Jones, Gene, let's get you in here. Updates on George Kittle. This is the Giants 49ers today. Raheem Mostert. So we know we have some temporary situations to talk about, but also looking ahead to next week, how are these 49ers injuries looking?
Yeah, I think they're angling to try to get as many players back next week as they can. It's not surprising that they didn't really want to risk George Kittle's situation, bone bruise plus some sort of knee sprain on that turf where so many injuries occurred last week. Probably coincidental, but no reason. The players were concerned about that, so you wouldn't expect the Niners to do too much there. But Jimmy Garoppolo looks like he's likely to come back. Kittle has a very good chance of coming back next week, I believe. Mostert, not so sure. Just didn't really look comfortable on that knee toward the end of last week's game when he tried to play through it. Tevin Coleman's injury, he's already been on injured reserve, so that's going to be a little bit longer term situation for him. Mostert, I would say, is questionable at best for next week, but I think they're going to try to get all hands on deck as soon as possible for offense, given what happened with their defensive line and the rest of the team last week. So I'm hopeful we'll get those three players back, but I'd put Mostert lowest on the list of likelihood.
And some good news on Deebo Samuel this week.
Yes, and that was sort of expected, hopeful that after they gave him a little bit of time to let that inflammation cool off after he had ramped up his rehab, that they were going to get him back sooner than later. Doesn't sound like they're going to rush him back necessarily, maybe a week or so after he comes off IR before they really get him ramped up. But again, for a team that had such a strong defense and was hopeful to be sort of symmetric from offense to defense with what's going on with that defensive line, I think they're going to be a team that wants to score points, and Kyle Shanahan should be able to do that. So the sooner they get Samuel and Mostert back to go with the rest of the crew, the better.
Mitch, you gave us the number last week, 2,600 Jordan Reed, right? 2,600. I don't know what that works out like per point, per dollar. I'm sure it's going to be one of the best numbers of the year by far. Do we go back to Jordan Reed? And if not, who are some other low-price tight ends to help us build lineups today?
Well, first off, I appreciate the little pat in the back. That's always nice to receive one on Sunday morning, so I appreciate that. Most of my Sunday mornings, I'm just getting yelled at by my kids, so you're the man. I appreciate you.
Every morning.
Yeah, it was great. He looked so good last week as a 30-year-old tight end coming off a billion injuries over the last half decade. And went out there, caught 7 catches, 50 yards, 2 scores on 8 targets. Looked great. Hurdled a guy to get into the end zone. It was interesting to see. At 4K, he's in play again this week to me on DraftKings. I think you can rack up some PPR catches, even if you're not looking at a red zone touchdown. You had mentioned something earlier about Raheem Mostert, and it really I kind of wanted to circle back to the running back situation there. I was looking at it, and the Giants had given up 142 yards rushing per game on the ground. I get it, very small sample size, but their defense was suspect coming into the season. The issue today is, where are you going? Are you going with McKinnon at 4.9K? Are you going with Jeff Wilson at 4K? I think the potential opportunity there at Wilson, getting a couple red zone opportunities today over Jerick McKinnon, is probably the better play for the 49ers backfield today against the Giants, whom I do think they will be winning most of the day too, which makes McKinnon probably lesser of an option on a site like that. Now, at the tight end position, again, it's going to be a lot of the similar names because DraftKings priced up their players at the tight end position. So it's actually a little bit more difficult this week to find those tight end options that are really cheap. But one of them I'm looking at this week, similar to Jordan Reed last week, I'm hoping is lower owned, is going to be Dan Arnold from the Arizona Cardinals. He is 2.8K on DraftKings. Is a very interesting option. I believe he played over 70% of the snaps last week with Max Williams out of the lineup, and that is potentially going to be a nice value if he can get into the end zone. I only had 4 targets, 2 catches, 20-something yards. Is the upside there? I don't know. I think we're banking on a touchdown, but you got to like a tight end that's going to be playing on a team that has almost 31 points implied as an offense, and that's probably going to be the lowest I'll go today, and I'm not even sure DraftKings goes much lower than that.
Real quick, Mitch, since you brought up Detroit, Arizona, you dabbling in some Andy Isabella with Christian Kirk out? Are we going to sprinkle him into some lineups?
Yeah, that's something I've been racking my brain about all week, and I think that he's just kind of like a Deshaun Jackson light, right? He's a downfield threat, he's a burner, and those types of guys I don't usually like to target on either FanDuel or DraftKings. I'm really looking for people who have a little bit higher probabilities, and if I'm paying for somebody who's going to be incredibly volatile, I want them to be like Dan Arnold cheap. So my preferred stack options today with Kyler Murray are going to be pay all the way up for DeAndre Hopkins, or pay down, grab myself some Dan Arnold. And I'm not even sure there's anybody I'm really looking at running back on the other side. Marvin Jones seems to be priced up a bit. TJ Hawkinson, I suppose, is a fine option if you're not using Dan Arnold in the tight end spot. And other than that, I mean, I don't know if you guys feel comfortable about Kenny Golladay or Marvin Jones at these prices. I'd actually be intrigued to hear what you think.
Yeah, Gene, I'll toss that to you. Woodrow, I've got some stuff queued up for you. But since Mitch steered us back to Kenny Golladay, give us the overview, because he's going to play, but it's not that simple, Gene.
No, I don't think it's that simple. I think he is going to play, and I think this is what the Lions have targeted from the beginning. Is they were hopeful that he'd be able to play sooner than later. Didn't put him on injured reserve. Allow him to recondition last week. Put him through a limited week of individual drills. Golladay is unfortunately saying that he's not 100%, but he's much better than he was last week, and that really sounds like it's going to be enough for him to play. He's been positive all week, talking to the media. I don't know that means we're going to see 90% of the offensive snaps go Galladay's way today. You could see him maybe take a little bit of time off, but the target should be there. She should be higher leverage. I don't know that we're going to see, double-digit targets and above, but definitely 6, 7, 8, possibly more than that, are well within the range of expectation. And I'm not too concerned about what I heard from Golladay. We know that he's still within the risk of aggravation. Were this the offseason, they'd probably give him another week or two off practice, but this is a close enough and let him go situation, and there's enough positivity that I think you can trust him.
All right, Woodrow, let's circle back to the Giants-49ers game. Some season-long teams are in desperate straits. If you had to pick one 49ers back and one Giants back to play, which one would you play today?
Well,
exactly. It's not pretty.
I guess I can't go Montgomery Brewster and say none of the above.
Great reference, by the way.
Thank you. For all the young people in the video are like, what is he talking
Richard
about?
Pryor. You need more Richard Pryor in your life.
Yeah. No, back to the question. I think the points Mitch made relative to the DFS play, because there you have to factor in salary and value per point. Like, that makes sense. But for me, in a redraft situation, I'm all about Jerick McKinnon. He's looked good. We saw those reports in the preseason about how, well, of course, you have to temper everything, but there were several beat writers who were like, he's the best player in camp, the best back in camp. And of course, we didn't overreact to that, but it just filed that away, because after 2 lost years, it was interesting to hear that said. And, again, he was healthy throughout the preseason. He's looked good so far. And let's not forget, he was the hand-picked guy. He was supposed to be the centerpiece of this offense, right, before those injuries. So while I think it's reasonable to wonder if he'll ever be that player again, this week he gets the chance to show it. So I've actually got McKinnon in several lineups, again, by necessity. I wish that weren't the case, but it is. And so he's my guy for sure. And then on the Giants, it's much harder. I don't think there's anyone that I would recommend putting in your lineup that you have to feel good about. Certainly from a talent perspective, and if one of them is going to work out for you for the rest of the season, you have to think it's Davante. But we just don't know, right? I mean, he bided his time. I guess it worked out for him. He landed in a place where he could be the feature back, which is what I think he wanted. But I don't know that I feel great about starting him cold in week 1 in that matchup. So I guess this week, if gun to my head, I would put Freeman in if I had multiple Giants backs to choose from. But that one I think is, if you're 0-2 and looking to have a must win, that's a tough spot to be in. I don't foresee great success from any of those guys.
Yeah, there's an argument for all 3 Giants backs. And the 49ers defense is also banged up at multiple positions. So we'll see Evan Ingram, Darius Slayton, and Golden Tate, of course, on a narrower target tree. And McKinnon, just to put a punctuation mark on what Jason was saying, McKinnon has looked terrific. He's looked as good as he's looked at any point in his career on his touches so far, and the alignment with offense that's him. I wouldn't be surprised if he is 12 to 15 touches, but still a very good play this week. Gene, A.J. Brown's not going to be a good play. Lots of people bummed out in the chat room about this one. A.J. Brown's not going to be a good play this week. Maybe not going to be a good play for a while. And I know that bone bruises, I always like it when we can be educational. Bone bruises are actually, and it's not a true microfracture in the sense of microfracture surgery, Gene, but they actually are fractures, correct?
Correct. Yep. There's enough disruption there, especially. So when we're talking about bone bruises around the knee, there's a George Kittle situation where the bruise is somewhere around the knee joint, but not to a weight-bearing surface where there's cartilage overlying the area that gets cracked, as you say, and then sometimes the bone itself is disrupted underneath. And there's situations like we've seen with Devontae Freeman in the past. That's the most recent example. And now A.J. Brown, where it's almost certainly to a weight-bearing part of the knee. And that becomes a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 week situation, and bones, and that it depends on where it is. It depends on how much healing is going on, and it sounds like Browns has taken a little bit longer to heal than they hoped. So this could easily stretch. And I saw you tweet this morning that maybe there's a little bit of remorse about the injured reserve decision potentially, because if he's not able to practice and he's not healing well, you give him a really low chance of playing next week, and it's going to bleed into a 3-week situation here. So hopefully we're not looking at something like week 7, week 8 before he returns, and he'll have a better chance to return for week 5, but doubtful for next week at this point, and then we're week to week after that.
Mitch, we were already targeting the Viking secondary. Now we have Cam Dantzler and Mike Hughes out. Maybe it could actually be an unexpected improvement for the Vikings. But without A.J. Brown, again, that narrows that target tree. That points us at the boom-bust option of Corey Davis, the high-floor option, who's been actually consistent this year, Adam Humphries, and then the grown man of the bunch, Jonnu Smith, who had 2 touchdowns last week. Which angle or multiple angles do we want to take out of this Titans pass offense today?
Yeah, for me, it's just going to be the cheapest one. It's Adam Humphries. And I like the floor and I like the PPR option, specifically speaking on DraftKings at 3.9K. His price tag just did not rise. And he was in play last week. And I know quite a few people had jumped on him with some of those stacks there with Tannehill, and he looked great. My concern this week, it's not their implied team total of 26. It's not the Vikings giving up 35.5 points per game in the first 2 weeks. It's not the fact that they've given up 155 rushing yards over the first 2 games average wise. Will the Vikings just roll over and die? I mean, truly, they have run so few offensive plays. It just looks like there's a potential here today where it's just a Derrick Henry game, right? And Derrick Henry just kind of takes over, just smash mouth football. Tannehill throws 20 passes like we've seen happen a half dozen times over the last year, in which case all those guys, unless they're getting some red zone targets, they're not going to hit value, even though their price tags are still affordable. They need some type of upside, in which case, I think if you're playing them, the play is to run it back with like an Adam Thielen type play, maybe Dalvin Cook, and you're just saying this is going to be a high scoring affair. The Vikings are going to stay in the game, some type of game theory where you think the pass catchers of the Titans need to be relied upon, in which case, Derrick Henry had a poor game. So you're not using Derrick Henry in those types of stacks or those game stacks. I think you kind of have to plant your flag today. Is it going to be a Derrick Henry day? If so, do not touch the pass catchers. If you think it's going to be a pass catcher day, I don't think you're playing Derrick Henry, but you do have to plant your flag because of just how poorly the Vikings have been playing this year. And the Vikings have only run 48 plays per game the first 2 weeks. It is the lowest in the NFL by 20 plays. Conversely, on the other side of it, there are 5 teams over 150 plays over the first 2 weeks. The Vikings haven't even cleared 100. There's a chance this game is just so slow that none of these guys really offer us the opportunity for the upside we're looking for.
Kubiak said something this week like, we're running the ball fine, we just need to run it more, or something like that. Sometimes the game passes certain people by. And I love the way, Mitch, by the way, for anybody, dipping your toes in DFS for the first time or longtime DFS player, that's so important to commit to a game script, to commit. You can't play both sides. That's a way to have a losing lineup. Which I just want to tap into your years and years of football watching to get at Mitch's larger question here. Are the Vikings just going to roll over and die to see a team, probably the worst team in the league? Even the Jets are saying we were kind of competitive into the fourth quarter against the Bills. Do you see the Vikings coming back to life, like out of the grave, or can we start to put some dirt on the coffin?
As I hear Mitch talking, and he did a great job of recapping just how abysmal the Viking season has started off. But me, I'm a numbers guy first and foremost when it comes to analysis, and as he's talking, I'm just in my mind picturing the words regression, positive regression. I mean, I don't think the Vikings are going to be a very good team. I think they're going to be a very frustrating team if you have fantasy assets that you're relying upon. But I also don't think, based on the track records of the inconstituent pieces, that we should think somehow that they're the Jets for the rest of the year. I just don't see that. I mean, Thielen was a highly effective fantasy producer in week 1. And yes, I know Cousins threw 3 interceptions last week and was one of the worst stat lines you could ever see from a quarterback that you had in your lineup. But that said, I mean, Kirk Cousins has a long track record here. I mean, let's not forget he was a top 8 fantasy quarterback for 4 straight years in spite of having 4 straight different offensive coordinators. And he's been hamstrung by the Vikings seemingly, Mike Zimmer just keeps putting these play callers in place that just are hyper conservative. And they certainly haven't given him, Justin Jefferson was supposed to offset the loss of Stephon Diggs, at least for this year. So no, to answer your question, I don't think what we've seen of the Vikings year to date is indicative of what we're going to get from them. I certainly think that over the course of this year, I'm still open to the idea that Adam Thielen is a near weekly play. I don't think many people were counting on Kirk Cousins in redraft leagues anyway. So yeah, I don't know that there's much change. As you know, I wasn't a big Dalvin Cook guy coming into the season, but I think it's unfair to put dirt on him as well. There's a lot of work to be done, right? The offensive line has to get in shape, and we have to see Kubiak wake up and be a little more open to a 2020 game script. But I don't think we should also rule that out. And I think that Kirk Cousins has proven many times that in positive game scripts, he can be productive. So I think, if you're going to tell me, do I think the Vikings are going to be bottom half of the league this year? Sure, it certainly seems like that's very possible. But do I think they're going to be an absolute fade and you can't rely on any player? No, I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, they got that Mike Zimmer extension before the season. Maybe regretting that. And the Donnell Hunter tweak, a herniated disc, actually. Not quite a tweak. Mitch, you're going to have to go in like a minute, so I'm going to pepper you with questions here. How essential is Terry McLaurin today to winning lineups?
I would have said if he was at his week 1 or week 2 price tag, very essential. But this week he's been priced up. I feel like he's kind of priced at value. He is somebody I likely would use if involving game stacks with Cleveland. I don't think there's a lot of juice in that game that I'm looking at taking. I do like Nick Chubb quite a bit, though. With his price tags, he's kind of that awkward pricing. He's so close to, the Derrick Henrys, the Delvin Cooks, Zeke Elliott, these players who, you can rely on week in and week out. He's priced so close to him. So I think he's likely the lowest owned guy out of that group. And I think he has similar upside. And it's very similar to the week 2 play with Aaron Jones. He was 7.1K on DraftKings. He was within $1,000 of every single elite running back. And it made him the lowest owned guy. And he ended up exploding, and you needed him to win a tournament. Is Nick Chubb that player this week? I don't know. I think there's potential for that. I think Washington's defense is looking pretty decent this year. The pass rush is ferocious, right? And does that make the Browns just kind of lean on that running game, the 1-2 punch in the backfield, and kind of takes all the Browns out of play? I think, again, this is a similar situation where you kind of have to plant your flag. Is it a Nick Chubb day, or is this going to be a pass attack where, guys on the Cleveland offensive side are catching a bunch of passes, in which case you can run it back with Terry McLaurin? That's a good question.
Last but least, Mitch, Dallas, Seattle, do you just hope you have a big enough bankroll to shotgun approach this game and hit everybody, or are you narrowing your focus?
Oh, I love the question. So, man, this total is so good. It's so target rich. I mean, this is going to be one of those games where, my friends, I'm just going to eat the chalk literally everywhere. I mean, you throw a dart at a name and I'm going to have exposure there today. I want them all. And I actually don't think their price tags are too high. I mean, truly, Gallup, 5.5K. CeeDee Lamb is, I think, right around 5K. Amari Cooper, just touching 7K, I believe. These guys, I want exposure to all of them. Tyler Lockett, fairly priced. DK Metcalf, I want some. Chris Carson, I want some of that too. I want both quarterbacks. I want Schultz at tight end for Dallas. I mean, truly, I want large game stacks. And I think the play here, and it's, you either target this game and you say it's going to be just a phenomenal fantasy game, so I'm going to have 4 or 5 guys involved in my entry, or you're saying, it's not going to hit its potential and I'm going to fade it. I don't think it's a game where you're saying, well, I want this one piece here. I think CeeDee Lamb is the play. I don't think that's the way to do it. I think if CeeDee Lamb goes nuclear, there's likely multiple players that are going bonkers today too, in which case you're going to miss out, and you kind of have to plant your flag And I don't think, I wish I had kind of thought of what Jason had said earlier with regression to the Vikings offense. I think there's a lot of credence there, especially with a guy like Dalvin Cook could explode today at any point. It's Dalvin Cook. He's one carry away from an 80-yard rushing touchdown. This game, I don't know if there's regression to be had. I'm going to use that term again. I just think these offenses and these teams, they are what they are. I think they're high scoring offenses. They're explosive. And regression wise, I don't know if there is any.
All right. Well, we're bonkers for Mitch Carl's DFS advice, DFS and donuts. Still waiting on the donuts. Rise or fall. And he's going to be doing stuff with Rise or Fall all morning. So thank you, Mitch, for making us smarter.
Good luck, everybody. You guys are in great hands. It's the best company out there. Football Guys for Life, baby. I'll see y'all later.
Woo. Thank you, Mitch. That gives me a little
warm and
tingles.
fuzzy.
Yeah, right. Because Mitch is obviously top choice, and
like Sig's facial hair.
I just get the little shadow. It gets grayer every time. So many things to jump into, and I just love the lesson again from Mitch. And it's not just for DFS, but commit. Don't bench, sit. Let me just go back to, before I go back to Eugene. He brought up Nick Chubb, Jason. Mm-hmm. What do we think about Chubb and Hunt? Because Chubb and Hunt is a good commit kind of choice every week when you're lineup setting. If you think Cleveland's going to have success and they're playing that tough Washington defensive line, then Chubb is the guy. But if you think that they're going to struggle, maybe even fall behind. Can they possibly fall behind against Washington's offense? I don't know. But Hunt would be the guy. We saw Hunt make the most out of a very limited opportunity. He was optimal. A lot of running backs that get the opportunity he had in week 2 probably scored less of the fantasy points, less than half. Chubb and Hunt, what do you think in the Cleveland-Washington game today, Jason?
I actually do think they're both fine plays, assuming that you're in a league where you have 2 running back spots and then a flex. So if you're I think both are totally fine. In fact, just full disclosure, I have Kareem Hunt and Chubb in lots of leagues, and not in both, but I mean, if I have one of them, I'm playing them pretty much this week, no problem. The Washington football team, I was the first-hand recipient of that week 1 beating that put them on the map as a stout defense. That's it. I mean, again, jury's still out, right? I mean, in terms of how good they are, just given who they've played so far. And it makes me very sad to have to throw the Eagles into the dumpster fire category so far, but they have been. Washington's giving up 109 rushing yards, which is decent, but it's not even in the top 10 so far in the league. So we're still early days. I guess the point I'm trying to make is I'm highly confident that the WFT's pass rush is legitimate. I'm not sure that they're much more than an average run defense. And as you said, I mean, there's still so many questions about their offense that I think that I wouldn't be at all surprised in terms of planting your flag. I think Cleveland will have a pretty good game script this week. And I think that because of that, both players will produce. I'm with you that if you're sitting there thinking, no way, Woodrow, Washington's going to be able to shut down the running game and Mayfield's going to have to pass to win it, well, then I would agree with you. You might want to be reticent about hoping Chubb gives you a top 10 week, and you should feel great about starting Hunt. But again, I just think that I get back to what Matt Waldman always said about Chubb. I mean, Chubb, talent-wise, I think is the right up there with the very best backs in the league. If he were on the Cowboys or, pick your other top offense, he would be an MVP caliber player. And I do think that talent often wins out. So I'm fine with both this week, particularly because I'm of the belief that Cleveland will be in positive game situations for most of the game.
Yeah, it seems like things will either go very well or not well at all for Cleveland's offense. There's not going to be a lot of in-between days. A lot of players that at least theoretically are in between playing and not playing this week. Let's go to Davante Adams playing tonight, because it sure seems like there's an effort through media to sell us on the idea that he has a chance to play, but all of the actual data we have seems to suggest he doesn't have a chance to play.
I think it was a tale of two separate narratives this week, from Monday hearing that the Packers really didn't need him in a multiple touchdown game and he was on the sidelines prepared to play, and then Matt LaFleur saying, well, we're just going to wait and see, and then turned out that they were up by 2.5 touchdowns and didn't need him even in the fourth quarter, to Adams actually talking to the media earlier in the week and saying, I think I have a chance to play, we'll see how it goes. And then complete silence from Thursday, Friday, no practice, no media interviews. The only thing we got overnight was there's a chance to play, knowing that Green Bay is among, if not the most conservative medical staff in the league in terms of returning star players from injury. It doesn't make any difference. We saw Aaron Rodgers miss a little bit more time than maybe some folks expected with a collarbone injury years ago. Same went with Randall Cobb and his lower leg injury after that. We go on and on and on, with the exception of an offensive lineman who will sometimes talk his way onto the field, whether it be Brian Bulaga or David Bakhtiari over the years. Green Bay Packers, who are questionable during the week, if they're not close to full strength, they generally get held out an extra week. And I think that's what we can expect with Adams. However, it is, by all accounts, a mild and low-grade hamstring injury. So if something does break positively in the next 6 to 7 hours, you can probably expect him to have a decent, if not high-ceiling game. I just don't know that you can go into tonight's game expecting that to be the case, because I think he's clearly to the doubtful side of questionable. And you can't assume that, if there's a 10% chance, say, that he's on the active roster, that then you're okay. Unless you have a very viable hedge in the Sunday or Monday night game, I think you put Adams on the bench and hope that he's there for you next week.
So you brought very viable hedge, because our buddy Diego is in the chat room, and he was asking, his hedges are Emmanuel Sanders and Mecole Hardman. So if we're going to talk about very viable hedges on the Chiefs, we have to talk about Sammy Watkins to complete this picture.
Yeah, and I all signs are he's okay. I made the argument yesterday before practice that we needed to be as worried about the neck condition as the concussion, because your concussion symptoms may have resolved well enough that you can go through individual drills and be cleared by an independent neurologist for contact. But you have to be able to protect your head and neck, especially if you've had a recent concussion, but always if you've got some sort of neck sprain or strain. And Andy Reid's comments yesterday after practice were very reassuring there, by which he said whatever he did in rehab to help get that knot straightened out, he did a very good job of. So it doesn't seem like the neck issue is a concern either. So he fully practiced on Saturday. There were no indications that he wasn't going to be cleared by an independent neurologist. So I think you will have him available on Monday night.
So Woodrow, we have, there's hedges like Miles Boykin, Watkins and Hardman. Maybe neither one are that attractive if Watkins is playing. Emmanuel Sanders looked like his best years were behind him, the way he looked. Maybe there's Traquan Smith in this game tonight as a viable hedge. But here's how I'm advising folks this week. Just don't play Adams. Don't expect to play Adams. Set your lineup as if you're not going to have Adams. Because if it's an Adams or some inferior hedge to a player from an earlier game that you like better anyway, I say play your early game option. What say you?
Completely agree on that. If you had a great draft and you have a receiver sitting on your bench that's fringe top 25 so far this year, you feel like he's played his way into that. I would agree. I'm assuming Davante Adams doesn't play this weekend. Even if he does, it's going to be in a decoy situation. So I'm with you, Sig. But I will say that a lot of times these late games force you to make that decision. We're in a bit of an interesting. I think people that have Adams are in a fortunate situation this week, because just in going through my own leagues this week with waivers and lineups, a lot of what I would say like typical home leagues, either Valdez-Scantling or Lazard or both were available and may still be available, especially Lazard. I see Lazard on a lot of waivers in the main league. So theoretically, if you're just looking at your lineup and thinking, I don't trust in Emmanuel Sanders, there's no one else I can start because I'm banged up elsewhere, maybe you have A.J. Brown too, and you really, really would start Adams if he's active, you have that opportunity. If you can pick up a Lazard or you have an MVS or you have a Traquan Smith, you can wait until we get clarity, right? So most weeks where you have a late game star like this, you don't have that option. So you do have that option this week. But that said, I'm assuming he is not playing. I'm assuming he's a fantasy liability this week. And absolutely, we go with your next best available player.
Do you have a lean if someone had to choose between Lazard and Valdez-Scantling, or just your general feeling about them going against the Saints corners? Saints defense was bad on Monday night, but the corners weren't really the problem.
No, agreed. I am leaning towards Valdez-Scantling, but as we talked about last week, both have had their moments. Aaron Rodgers is still the captain of that ship, and I always pay attention to who he seems to be giving shine to, and he seems to be in love with MVS this year and hasn't given Lazard much love. So if for some reason you have the option of both, I would lean towards Valdez-Scantling. But don't at me if Lazard goes home.
Yeah. Well, like Andy and Nelson said, who will Lattimore be on? I mean, that's hard to say. They're both long receivers. Lattimore's speed may be a little better against Valdez-Scantling, although I think Lazard's a better route runner. A lot to think about in that game as teams are headed in opposite directions. Everyone knows what direction the Falcons are headed after last week, Gene. What about Julio Jones this week? And it seemed like this escalated. This went from Julio, and I've learned so much from Eugene, that always adding in that curve of if a player indicates something pessimistic about his condition, then that's especially prominent in our picture of how the player's doing, because usually they will err towards acting like they're much more optimistic than they should be about their injury. So this week, it seems like Julio's not going to play, but also we're thinking about what's Julio as an asset going forward. What's Julio's status next week? What do we know?
Yeah, stars don't make excuses for their play. Stars usually find a ways to stay on the field. They will play through injury. They will minimize. They'll tell you that they're X% in a way to tell you that they need that positivity and optimistic. You can't get out on an NFL football field and be successful if you don't have confidence in your ability. And for Julio to come off the field on Sunday last week, disappointed as he was, and say, I can't run the way I need to run, it suggests that something happened during the game. We saw him reach just gently, just for the slightest second, and then decide he didn't want to show any sign of weakness there when he reached behind his leg for that pass for Russell Gage in the end zone there. And there's every indication that it's been a pretty significant aggravation. Now, Julio is one of these players that will play through injury, sometimes effectively, more often than not effectively. But when he doesn't practice and he's listed questionable, that usually means that there's something up and we can't trust him in the same way. This is the corollary to what we've been saying the last couple of weeks, was when he returns to practice and he's not listed on the Friday afternoon through Sunday game status report, then you can trust him. There's always a risk of aggravation, as we saw last week, but you can trust him to get targets and be effective and productive if you're in that situation. That is not the case this week. There's a chance that he'll play, but we saw how he played through this aggravated injury last week. The Falcons have other weapons they can use. I just don't see a ton of high leverage targets like we'd seen for other similar players in the past for Jones, and I think he's doubtful. I know that the Falcons and some of the national media members are giving him a chance to play. It's being said anything from iffy to up in the air, all that sort of stuff. But I'm going to be surprised if he's active. And I'll be even more surprised if we see 60 snaps and 35 routes run and 10 targets and Julio's usual production. So be very leery about using him this week. And I would be hopeful that this doesn't become a situation where, we're game planning against the other team by saying he's not going to play. And then we hear after today's game that this is going to be a 3 to 4 week situation. And the last thing is, I would not put, as we're talking about game planning here, I would not put any stock in Dan Quinn saying we're game planning with Julio Jones in mind. That is not difficult. Right. I mean, that he is part of
if they're game planning that he's not going to be out there, that's game planning with him in mind.
That's different, but that was not the implication, right? So, but I mean, it's the same offense, it's the same quarterback, it's the same wide receiver. You don't have to game plan to put him in to the offense, right? I mean, that's there. If he wakes up on Sunday morning and says I can play, fine. You go back to whatever you were doing before. That's not hard. So I would not take that as a positive sign at all. That's, again, I think that is more likely to be gamesmanship and a negative comment than it is positive in Julio Jones's favor today.
Woodrow, last year, going into this game, Bears can get some pressure on the quarterback. Julio Jones not going to play. Probably we'd say Austin Hooper's going to have 11 catches or 12 catches in this game, right?
Mm-hmm.
This year, we have Calvin Ridley, who has asserted himself as an elite number one receiver in terms of fantasy production, and we'll see about him as a number one receiver in this game. We have Russell Gage, who threw that touchdown that Julio dropped that led Julio to say, it's my hamstring, and Hayden Hurst, who is showing that he can be that downfield threat that Austin Hooper wasn't, but hasn't become that struggle target that Matt Ryan relied on. So what's your projection of the Falcon offense without Julio today? Obviously, we're playing Ridley. It's more of a Gage-Hurst question, or is it more of a let's sit back with Gage and Hurst this week in close calls to see how they look before we trust them?
Well, I love your optimism because let's be honest. I mean, have we ever been in a situation entering week 3 where most people watching the show didn't have that choice, in the sense that there are so many injuries so far that, and again, I'm just speaking from personal experience, having 30 plus leagues to set lineups for. We don't have the luxury of these choices, right? Like in the leagues that I have Russell Gage, I'm playing him because he's clearly the best option, with my assumption that Julio Jones will be a non-factor. The same with Hayden Hurst, right? I mean, there aren't 12 tight ends that you look at and think, I feel great about putting them out there in any game script. So I would imagine, depending, you would feel almost obligated to play either one, and I'm okay with that. I mean, you're certainly right. We don't need to say anything about Calvin Ridley. He even with a healthy Julio Jones, he may be on the verge of becoming their best player and one of the 2 or 3 best receivers in football. Without a healthy Julio, he's probably the safest start at the position until otherwise noted. But yeah, I'm absolutely fine with Gage. It's funny because he had that first big week, and then he was sort of a semi-hot waiver target, and I thought, that's weird. Like, that's probably a 1-year wonder. You're wasting fab dollars. And then he did it again in week 2, and then Julio gets banged up, right? And you're thinking, oh, maybe that was a really smart buy. So yeah, I'm fine with him. It's interesting as I look at this game, though, on the whole. I mean, the Falcons' defense has been atrocious, right? They've given up 480 yards a game, 39 points a game. But their defense, rather, but their offense has been pretty good, right? I mean, their offense is I think 4th in the league in yards, and I think 3rd or 4th in points. So whereas the Bears, it's just the opposite, right? I know we've been somewhat surprisingly impressed by Trubisky's effectiveness, but as we noted, I mean, he had that one strange 4th quarter. Otherwise, he looked terrible. But like the Bears' offense is not very high on the standings, but their defense is reasonably high. So I'm not quite sure how this game is going to go. My presumption is, again, from a regression standpoint, like can the Falcons' defense be that bad? I guess the answer is yes. But
yeah,
but I'm going to assume that I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Falcons win this game. And because I feel like with the Falcons, because they've had so many highs and lows, and with people absolutely just having such disdain for Quinn, like this just feels like one of those games where we've kind of written the Falcons off, and then they win comfortably, like 35-10, and we're like, oh, the Falcons, they're like middle of the pack team, right? Like, so, I mean, I'm not saying all you bettors out there that are in a place like Jersey, I'm not saying go and bet the money line on the Falcons or something, but I'm just saying, like, I think the Falcons will have a pretty effective game this week.
It's interesting because the Bears are the least confidence-inspiring 2-0 team in the history of 2-0 teams. You know, the Lions just puked all over themselves, and then the Giants actually clawed back into that game last week after Barkley got knocked out, and the Bears kept handing them chances to win. They couldn't, but all things considered, I think that losing a player like Barkley sends an emotional shockwave through a team, and for them to still hang in that game doesn't say much about the Bears. And you're right, the Falcons played well last week. They lost the game, but the reason they lost is because of another Falcons-esque collapse, which needed them, to play well to have something to collapse from. So staying on that game real quick, because you're right, it is a really interesting game from a betting standpoint, Jason. It's funny, week 4, week 5 are usually, I feel like, the correction weeks, but we've already talked about Minnesota. Atlanta's another interesting team. Maybe the Bears are correction in the other direction. You mentioned the Falcons defense, A.J. Terrell. And by the way, Gene, yay, A.J. Terrell, our first in-season COVID case, and it sounds like this was contained.
Yeah. Sounds like it was contained.
Well, because I feel like a day test.
I'm not interested in throwing a wet blanket and a downer on this. However, I trust the contact tracing that is going on. I'm glad that they have GPS monitors to see where we are. I don't know whether or not we can entirely trust a set of COVID tests 24 to 36 hours after the potential exposure was done. So that's my only concern here. We don't know all of the details of when the test was done, whether he was symptomatic. I don't know. I am trusting that the NFL has done a very good job so far. They're highly motivated, so are their players, that there is low risk here, but I would have some questions. They're probably hopeful that they're questions that could be answered by the league, that question in particular. But I don't think I'm 100% certain that this is over. I'm fairly highly certain, but again, I was kind of hoping you wouldn't ask me that question this morning because I don't have a great answer for it, and I do have a little bit of a sense of concern. Hopefully this is a single issue. They've done such a good job from training camp and beyond with having so few tests that everything they've put in place has been successful so far. So I'm going to trust that they're making good decisions as far as the contact tracing and the type of testing and the fact that they probably tested who knows how many, 100 to 150 people in that building over the last couple of days since Terrell has been positive, and probably twice, and they're all negative, is reassuring. But COVID is a pain in the ass. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. No, and I think you're right to point out, and this is for this is going to remain part of all of our practical life knowledge and skills for a while. That tests within 24, 36 hours of exposure are not definitive, and this is going to test the NFL's protocol and whether it's effective or not. And at least it seems like they can rule out the COVID infection coming from within the building for Terrell, but that still doesn't necessarily get us out of
Negative tests are much better than positive tests.
Yeah,
We'll leave it at that, and hopefully that's what we continue to see as the weekend and the week progresses in Atlanta.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting back to the matter at hand, Woodrow, the game, that bad defense. Are you looking at David Montgomery? Like you said, you probably don't have the luxury of sitting at David Montgomery, although you might have drafted him as your third running back. Allen Robinson testing your faith a little bit. Mitchell Trubisky testing your faith a little bit. What's your overall confidence level in the Bears' offense in this game?
Yeah, before just to put a last point on what you all just talked about, as Gene was talking, I was picturing that Oprah Winfrey meme, and it's like, you get a test, and you get a test, and you get a test, but just trying to make a little brevity of a very unfun situation. No, I think you said it, Sig. I mean, sometimes these lineup decisions are relatively simple. David Montgomery has been a pleasant surprise, right? His ADP fell kind of steadily over the course of the preseason and came pretty cheaply. So I think he probably was drafted as most people's third running back, if not fourth, depending on how running back heavy you were. I guess if you were a zero running back person, you may have hit the home run there, at least so far, and that if he was one of your zero running back targets, maybe your RB1, you haven't, it hasn't been a disaster. So I'm fine with Montgomery this week, especially given the sorry state of the Falcons defense. Allen Robinson's a tough one, man, because it's not the talent, but we know that he's an unhappy camper, right? Mm-hmm. He's unhappy. He's chirping. He's speaking out. And I wonder, and this is always dangerous to try and play armchair psychologist. I don't know Mitchell Trubisky from a hole in the wall, but I will say that, you have to think a veteran like Robinson wants to get paid. He feels like he's not getting shown the love. Does he demand the ball? Does he get frustrated if he doesn't get the ball early? Or in situations where he feels like he could have made a play on the ball and Mitch doesn't get him the ball or doesn't see him. I'm pretty reticent. I gave a lot of thought to whether, if Robinson has another bad week, do we recommend that you go out and trade for him? And I'm open to that. I just wonder, would the Bears be willing to midseason trade him, right? Like, that's the dream scenario, is that he's disgruntled and they jettison him for draft picks. I don't know that we can count on that, but I would love to see that. So I think the talent's certainly there.
Patriots.
Yeah, sure. I mean, or my Eagles, or lots of other teams that need a receiver. I'd be reticent to play Robinson, presuming you have the alternative again. This big caveat of, do you have an alternative? But Montgomery, I feel good about. I don't see why you wouldn't, right?
Yeah, Montgomery, especially. I'm actually even becoming a Montgomery believer after how he looked last week. Gene, there might be some Raiders believers out there after how they looked Monday night. Yeah. It's just a little bit sad because I've enjoyed the honeymoon of the Newton Patriots, and it's a positive story, but now they're the Patriots again, and we don't want to see them atop the heap in the AFC just because it's gotten boring, and the Raiders look like a good contender, but their right hand and their left hand in their offense, Jacobs and Waller, Gene, how much of this do you think was just rest after a hard-fought victory, and how much of it is genuine concern?
More the former than the latter, I think, given what we know this morning. The league is always more fun when the Raiders are in the mix
Yes.
for sure for lots of different reasons. I wasn't sure what to think of Darren Waller. Josh Jacobs, we've seen play through fairly painful injuries already between last year's groin situation and shoulder blade fracture. They pretty much had to take him off the field at the end of the year. And John Gruden didn't have any problems if he was on the field. He just kept feeding him carries and touches and targets and what have you. So you would expect that to be the case again today. Hip flexor is a little bit different. You saw him kind of getting stretched out, and that seemed to loosen him up in the fourth quarter. But over the course of the week, some stiffness. How much conditioning did he do? He really wasn't on the practice field. There is a chance of some tightness and some change in mobility, or something that kind of that kind of tightens up on him a little bit during the game. But if he's playing well enough, he's going to continue to get the ball. So what's he averaging, like 29 targets and touches a game right now? I mean, it's something ridiculous.
He's leading the league in target share. I think 35%. Yeah.
I don't know that I see that happening, but Jalen Richard, Davante, I just if he is at all healthy, if Jacobs can play, he is going to be used heavily. So, maybe put him down in the 20 to 25 range today, but I don't think all of a sudden we're going to see Jacobs only get 10 to 15 touches. If he's active, he seems like he is, you can expect him to get pretty close to his usual workload. Darren Waller, there were a couple of plays when I reviewed the film where he was hit on the outside of his knee. One in particular, his 12th of 12th receptions, got a pretty good hit on the outside of his knee, maybe a mechanism from an MCL sprain. Wasn't as quick to get up. I might have just been hallucinating because I was looking for something. But then you saw him back in line tight end blocking for all of those Jacobs runs at the end before the field goal to ice the game. And the Raiders, of all teams, they don't have any problem not allowing their players to practice and then putting them on the field. In fact, sometimes they keep them from practicing. All of the offensive line was dinged up last year, barely practiced and played every week with rare exception. And that's what we've seen from the Raiders offensive players. So really wasn't a lot of concern from the local media throughout the week. Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport essentially just said expected to play, no worries today. So I don't think there's a lot of concern with either one of these guys. So I'm leaning towards soreness, although I think we have a pretty good idea of what Jacobs' injury is, being a hip flexor situation. But we're going to find out today. I wouldn't have any problem using them in lineups of any sort today. But hopefully we see them take their usual snap count and see their usual workload and then put all this behind us in the future.
Gene, is it an overreaction to be thinking about selling Jacobs for like a lateral move because of him being on the injury report and 59 touches in the first two games?
No. One of the things we know about players with high workloads have proven that they can take high workloads, and they will do that through injury. We see it with Derrick Henry. We saw it with DeMarco Murray. We've seen it with Adrian Peterson. You get nervous about workload, but generally speaking, the opposite side of the curve, those players that show that they can take that number of touches, there's something about their body, there's something about their playing style that allows them to do this. And we're talking about how many Alabama running backs did we talk about over the year that were just beat all the way through college, and they were mostly used up, from Trent Richardson. And, Mark Ingram's having a little bit of success later on in his career, but had lots of those concerns. But there are players that are just going to be different about that. So I don't know what you consider a lateral move at this point. I mean, are you going to get Christian McCaffrey, Ezekiel Elliott? I mean, Josh Jacobs is arguably a top 3 or 4 player right now.
Miles Sanders.
Well, no.
Right, Jason?
Yeah. Sorry, we're not. You can discuss, but I'm not trading Josh Jacobs for Miles Sanders just because he's had 60 touches in the first 2 weeks.
What do we think of Sanders? And Jason, what do you think of that general idea of if you have Jacobs and he's been great for you, at least for week 1, you might consider making a lateral move in case he gets driven to the ditch like Cadillac?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you bring up Miles Sanders because to Gene's point, I mean, we're supposed to be concerned about Jacobs because he's getting a heavy workload for 2 weeks, but we're going to trade him for Sanders, who's already missed one of the first 2 weeks because he's banged up. Like, it's like that seems, I don't know, that one's hard. And again, as an Eagles fan, I think Miles Sanders should have a very good season. So I wouldn't be averse to trading for him in a package, but I'm with you. I kind of go with, I'm like, let's go with who you rode with, right? Now that said, I mean, Sig, I will say that the concern I had for Jacobs coming into this year from a dynasty perspective, which I know is a little bit more of a niche thing for our listeners and viewers, but if you're in a dynasty league and you have Jacobs, I would consider that he is getting Cadillac Williams. I think you made that reference early in the show. For those that are younger, aren't students of the history of the NFL, John Gruden he falls in love with players, and that's great. And he gives them 25, 30 touches, which is every fantasy manager's dream. But he did that with Cadillac Williams and basically ended his career 3, 4, 5 years shorter than it would have been. I think we could see that with Jacobs, but I say enjoy the ride, right? I mean, in the meantime, I wouldn't be like I wouldn't be actively looking to make what most would perceive as a 1-for-1 or vertical swap for Jacobs. I think I'm in the camp of this was veteran treatment of their two key offensive cogs, and we'll see this week if our presumptions are wrong. I think you said that week 4 or 5 is your regression, the regression weeks you call them. I always think of week 3 is super important because I call it the triangulation week. You have that week 1 and everyone overreacts, and we always remind people don't overreact. But then again, sometimes you need to overreact to that week 1 to get the breakout players. Then in week 2, you kind of look and say confirmation bias. Did the players that did great in week 1, did they regress? Should I be concerned? Shouldn't I be? And week 3 is kind of the answer, right? I mean, it's in a fantasy season where most of us have 12 or 13 weeks to make the playoffs. I think this third game, especially for players or situations or teams that have had a positive indicator and a negative indicator, I often look at this week to help me decide, should I cut bait? Should I sell for pennies on the dollar? Should I make an aggressive move to trade for someone? I mean, this to me is a key week for me in every season.
I like that triangulation. Week 3, those 3 data points create a trend, a legitimate trend. We don't have any super positive trends with the Eagles offense this week coming in, but it is the Cincinnati defense. So is it more of a Wentz bounces back, Deshaun Jackson bounces back, or is it, as Mike Kay, one of my favorite Eagles beat writers, made the case for, it's Miles Sanders, all Miles Sanders, and more Miles Sanders this week?
Yeah. Well, we talk about triangulation, right? So the Eagles have 2 negative data points, right? So if you were someone that drafted or thought highly of the Eagles offense coming into the season, as many did, this is a pull the ripcord week, right? If they do not perform well against the Bengals, then you have no choice but to really consider putting most of these guys on the bench, right? I presume most people aren't going to start Carson Wentz this week. I know a lot of people probably swapped in like a Gardner Minshew for him. That's probably going to bite you in the butt this week, but c'est la vie. What can you do? But yeah, I definitely think, given what we know of the Bengals, given what we know of the Eagles really, I mean, they're one of the 2 or 3 teams this week that need to show something. And if they don't, you kind of have to chalk up that you took the L on draft day, relying on a lot of these pieces, right? So I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll see some signs of life, but it just comes down to the offensive line, right? I mean, we've made another offensive line change this week. We've Nate Herbig over to the other side of the line. And, I think Miles Sanders, he's absolutely a must start. He looked great last week. How could you not play him based on what we know? But in terms of the receivers, I think Deshaun Jackson is a viable wide receiver 3 this week, with Rager out indefinitely. Alshon Jeffrey still out. It's kind of sad that we've gotten to the point where most of us assumed Alshon Jeffrey would be a DNP or a cut or a trade, and now Eagles fans were all like waiting with bated breath to find out if he's going to be active soon. That's what the season's come to. I know, Sid, you're the champion, the baton holder, the flag bearer of the Dallas Goedert camp, and I think Goddard and Ertz are both very viable starts this week and probably for the next few weeks. I actually still lean towards, if I had the choice, I would be more of an Ertz, even in DFS. I know I'm not a DFS guy, but I prefer Ertz to Goddard this week in DFS because their price differential isn't large enough that I still think Ertz would be the higher targeted player. But yeah, it's with the Eagles, we know what we are right now. We're Miles Sanders, 2 tight ends, and a Deshaun Jackson deep ball if the offensive line can keep Wentz healthy, right? And that should be enough. Like, that should all work against the Bengals. But even if they play well against this week, what does that really leave us, right? Because we're going to presume that the Bengals are going to be one of the worst defenses that they face. So I'm still not optimistic about the season, but I think this week could be this is the ripcord week.
Yeah, I like that ripcord week. These are all concepts that we should continue to expand on as we lay out the calendar, the ebb and flow. Last question, Gene. When you have your cursor hovering over that little checkbox and you're setting your lineup this morning, and the name next to it is Will Fuller, what feeling is going through your heart and your mind?
You drafted Will Fuller. You knew what you were getting into. If he's on your roster and he's not on the, the Houston offense being, I think the Houston offense is probably the bigger concern, right? I mean, where are we with Deshaun Watson? Where are we with David Johnson? Where are we with Will Fuller? Where are we with Bill O'Brien? That's the larger question. If you trust the offense and you trusted Will Fuller, you saw what you got out of him in the first week, tons of targets. So it's just a matter of, I hesitate to say it's snap to snap with him, but it seems like over the last 3 or 4 years, it's kind of been snap to snap. So if you rostered him, you probably drafted him at an ADP where you felt like he was going to be your wide receiver 2 or better. So I think you click the box and hope for the best.
Would you agree? Click the box, or have you been scared away?
No, I agree. No, he wasn't on the injury report, right? So I don't know. How do you not play? Yeah, you have to play Will Fuller this week. Now, again, getting back to the last point about it being triangulation week, if for some reason Will Fuller doesn't deliver this week, it's likely in Gene's context that we just have to really rethink the whole viability of the Texans as a fantasy safety net this year. But we shall see. I'm expecting Fuller to have a fine week, though, and the Texans to look okay.
I will say this. The Texans get Pittsburgh this week. So it's very possible that we could look at this as triangulation week or ripcord week for their offense. And then they get Minnesota, Jacksonville the next 2 weeks. So it could be a function of opponent. It could still be a function of schedule. Sometimes the schedule lines up so that it takes more than 3 weeks to learn. But we will always have Dr. Jene Bramel, Jason Wood, FBG Wood, by the way, if you're not following him, you know where to follow Dr. Jene Bramel, Gene with a J. It's fun. It's fun to get to enjoy Sunday mornings with friends. Also, thank you again to DFS and Donuts, Mitch Carl, Rise or Fall. Check that out. And we should savor and enjoy every Sunday morning that we get together to have that bubbling anticipation, that heady feeling of cracking open another Sunday of football. Folks, good luck to you today. Enjoy it. We love you always. Stay very classy.